Good morning and welcome to this Friday, February 21st, 10:10 a.m. Friday, February 21st, 2025, 10:10 a.m. joint committee decision making between the Hawaii State Senate Committees on Commerce and Consumer Protection and the Committee on Judiciary. This is room 016 at the Capitol, and we are prepared to make decisions on a number of measures that were previously heard in their respective subject matter committees. Oral and written testimony were taken in those committees. We've received written testimony on these measures as well, and are prepared to make recommendations to the joint committees. The first measure is SB 31 SD1. The recommendation relating to property. The recommendation is to pass this measure with amendments affecting the effective date to July 1, 2050 to further the discussion of the measure. There are also some technical non-substantive changes. Members, any discussion? Okay, seeing none, Vice Chair, passing with amendments, Chair votes aye.
Thank you. Vice Chair also votes aye. Senator McKelvey?
Yes.
Senator Richards?
Aye.
Senator Awa?
No.
Measure is adopted.
Thank you.
Same recommendation for JDC members. Any questions or concerns? If not, Senator Chang, who's acting as vice chair today.
For SB 31, the chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Senator Rhodes?
Aye.
Vice Chair Gabbard is excused. Senator Chang, aye. Senator San Buenaventura, excused. Senator Awa?
No.
Recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next measure is SB 83 SD1 relating to hotels. The recommendation on this measure is to pass with amendments. We will adopt the Attorney General's Office proposed amendments, adding a preamble and inserting a non-impairment clause. And we'll add a defective date on this measure of July 1, 2050. Members, any discussion? Okay, seeing none, passing with amendments. Chair votes aye.
Thank you. Of the CPN members present, are there any voting with reservations or objections?
Richards reservations? Oh, no.
Okay, reservations for Senator Richards, Senator Awa?
No.
Thank you. Measure is adopted.
Thank you.
Chair's recommendation for JDC on SB 83 is to pass with amendments. Questions or concerns? If not, Senator Chang.
Chair's recommendation for SB 83 for the JDC committee is to pass with amendments. Chair Rhodes?
Aye.
Vice Chair Gabbard is excused. Senator Chang, aye. Senator San Buenaventura?
Aye.
Senator Awa?
No.
Recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. The next measure is SB 182 SD1 relating to service disruptions. Because this measure is substantially similar to the prior measure, the recommendation is to defer. Next measure is SB 321 relating to transportation. The recommendation on this measure is to pass with amendments, affecting the effective date of the measure to July 1, 2050 to further discussion on the bill. Any discussion? Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair, for the recommendations. I'm going to be voting with reservations, particularly with respect to how this bill may impact Oahu and Honolulu types of abandoned roads. Thank you.
So noted. Any other comments or questions, members?
I'll be doing the same.
Okay, so noted for Senator McKelvey as well. Vice Chair passing with amendments. Chair votes aye.
Thank you. Vice Chair votes with reservations. Senator McKelvey.
WR
Senator Richards.
reservations?
Senator Awa.
No.
Thank you. Measure is adopted.
Thank you.
Same recommendation for JDC members. Any questions or concerns? If not, Senator Chang.
Chair's recommendation on SB 321 is to pass with amendments. Noting the excusal of Vice Chair Gabbard, are there any objections or reservations?
No.
Noting Senator Awa's objection, the recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next measure is SB 1035 SD1 relating to consumer protection. The recommendation on this measure is to pass with amendments, affecting the effective date of this measure to July 1, 2050. Yeah, that's it. Any discussion, members? If not, Vice Chair passing with amendments. Chair votes aye.
Thank you. Of the CPN members present, are there any voting with reservations or objections? Hearing none, measure is adopted.
Thank you.
Same recommendation for JDC members. Any questions or concerns? If not, Senator Chang.
Chair's recommendation for SB 1035 is to pass with amendments. Of the members present, are there any objections or reservations? Hearing none, the recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next measure is SB 1096 relating to license plates. The recommendation on this measure is to pass with amendments, adding a defective effective date of July 1, 2050. Any comments or questions, members? If not, Vice Chair passing with amendments, Chair votes aye.
Thank you. Of the members present, are there any voting with reservations or objections? Hearing none, measure is adopted.
Thank you.
For JDC members on SB 1096, same recommendation with amendments. Questions or concerns? Seeing none, Senator Chang.
SB 1096, Chair's recommendation pass with amendments. Of the members present, are there any objections or reservations? Seeing none, the recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. The next measure is SB 1160 SD1 relating to consumer protection. The recommendation on this measure is to pass with amendments. We will adopt language codifying section 3 by adding a new section to chapter 481B Hawaii revised statutes. Sort of a substantive tech. And we will defect the effective date of the measure to July 1, 2050. Any comments or questions, members?
Just a quick question on the repealing the provisions on ticket brokers, that reveals provisions already in the law as opposed to ticket brokers acting in this space.
Can you repeat?
I'll just go reservations for now.
Okay.
Just because I have a concern about the ticket broker language. Okay, just
So noted.
okay, thanks.
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, Vice Chair passing with amendments, Chair votes aye.
Thank you. Vice Chair also votes aye. Senator McKelvey,
I'll just go ayes.
Senator Richards,
Aye.
Senator Awa.
Aye.
Was that a no?
Aye, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Measure is adopted.
Thank you.
Same recommendation for JDC members. Any questions or concerns? If not, Senator Chang.
Chair's recommendation for SB 1160 is to pass with amendments. Of the members present, are there any objections or reservations? Seeing none, the recommendation is adopted.
Thank you very much. I think we're adjourned.
Yes.
All right, for the Judiciary Committee, we do have a 1020 agenda, decision-making only. Start out that one with SB 1030. This specifies that the practice of election fraud intimidation includes carrying any firearm or weapon at or within 200 feet of a voter service center, place of deposit, or polling place. The recommendation on 1030 is based on conversation with the Attorney General's office about the wording, make the following amendments will limit the bill to unconcealed carry for better nexus with the bill's goal of prohibiting voter intimidation. Also, existing laws will address concealed carrying of a firearm at or near a voter service center. Use the phrase dangerous instrument, including a firearm instead of any firearm or weapon, and add definitions to the statute for dangerous instrument, concealed and unconcealed. And we do have prior concurrence from the previous committee chair. Questions or concerns on 1030? If not, Senator Chang.
Chair's recommendation on SB 1030 is to pass with amendments. Chair Rhodes,
Aye.
Vice Chair Gabbard is excused. Senator Chang, aye. Senator Sunburn, return.
Aye.
Senator Wong.
No.
Recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next up is SB 5. This establishes that if a state legislative vacancy occurs during the death or permanent incapacitation of the prior incumbent before a primary election, but after the close of filing for that election, and the prior incumbent was the only person whose name appeared on any ballot for that seat for the election, the governor's appointment of a replacement shall be valid for both the unexpired term and the next succeeding term. Recommendation is to pass unamended, but there is some question as to the constitutionality of this. So we'll mention that in the committee report, and then we'll also ask for an AG's opinion so the next committee in the House can take a look at that if they want. So unamended with those other caveats. Questions or concerns? Excuse me. If not, Acting Vice Chair Chang.
Chair's recommendation for SB 5 is to pass unamended. Of the members present, are there any objections or reservations?
No.
Noting Senator Awa's objection, the recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next up is SB 95. This creates additional fines for any individual found operating a vehicle or moped without a current certificate of inspection. Pass with an amendment. We'll go ahead and insert $400 for the amount of the fine when the certificate is more than 2 years old. Right now, that's a blank amount. So that would be the only amendment. Questions, concerns?
My concern is that there's no justifiable reason to increase the amount to $400 as shown in the testimony, and with that, I'm gonna be voting no.
Okay. Any other concerns or questions? If not, Senator Chang.
Chair's recommendation for SB 95 is to pass with amendments. Noting Senator San Buenaventura's objection, are there any other reservations or objections?
No.
And also noting Senator Awa's objection.
Recommendation fails, unless, well, depending how you're voting, but
Then the recommendation failed. I guess it doesn't.
2 to 2's a fail.
Okay,
Yeah.
so then the recommendation fails.
Okay, thank you. Next up is SB 102, prohibits third-party restaurant reservation services from listing, advertising, promoting, or selling restaurant reservations without first obtaining a written agreement from the applicable restaurant authorizing the action. The recommendation here is to pass with some amendments. Let's see. We'll revise section 2, amending HRS 489J at page 3, lines 1 to 7 to read: any person who is charged a fee or price by or through a third-party restaurant reservation service for a reservation that is listed, advertised, promoted, or sold in violation of this section, or any restaurant for which a third-party reservation service has listed, advertised, promoted, or sold a reservation in violation of section may bring a civil action in any court of competent jurisdiction. This is primarily to clarify ambiguous language that might have implied that a person charged fees by a third-party reservation service could bring the action against the service or the restaurant, and to clarify that the section is intended to give both aggrieved persons and restaurants legal recourse. And then we'd like to change the, we'd like to insert the phrase "or a contractual designee of the restaurant expressly authorized by the restaurant to distribute reservations to a third party" after the word "restaurant" on page 2 on line 9. This is to allow restaurant reservation services who have contracts with a restaurant, for example, Open Table, to distribute reservations to third-party restaurant reservation services on the restaurant's behalf if permitted to do so under the contract. Questions or concerns? If not, Senator Chang.
Chair's recommendation for SB 102 is to pass with amendments. Of the members present, are there any objections or reservations? Seeing none, the recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next up is SB 142. This allows an insured to authorize the insurer to electronically deliver a claim check to the insured's mortgagee when a homeowner's insurance policy that covers a mortgaged property allows for the payment of proceeds by issuing a check. Recommendation here is to pass with amendments. We'll accept the banker's amendments, amendment, i.e. remit proceeds, not use the term remit proceeds, not write a check. Accept part of the insurer's counsel's proposed amendment, that is, the insured may authorize in writing that the proceeds will go to the mortgagee, and will add definitions of electronic delivery and mortgage agreement. And we do have prior concurrence. Questions or concerns? If not, Senator Chang.
Chair's recommendation for SB 142 is to pass with amendments. Of the members present, are there any objections or reservations? Seeing none, the recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next up is SB 146. This amends the conditions and procedures of alternative dispute resolution methods for condominium related disputes, which have been the subject of complaint from some who believe condo boards are too authoritarian, I guess is the right word. It has a bad effective date, so recommendation is to pass as is. Questions or concerns? If not, Senator Chang.
Chair's recommendation for SB 146 is to pass unamended. Of the members present, are there any objections or reservations? Seeing none, the recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next up is SB 147, also having to do with condos, establishes processes and requirements for associations to impose fines against unit owners. Again, this is topic has been the subject of complaint. So it does have a defective date, but we would like to make some technical changes to it, and that would be the only amendment. Questions or concerns? If not, Senator Chang.
Chair's recommendation for SB 147 is to pass with amendments. Of the members present, are there any objections or reservations?
No.
Noting Senator Awa's objection, the recommendation is adopted.
Okay, thank you. Next up is SB 183. This allows impasses and disputes relating to the amounts of state and county contributions to the Hawai'i Employer Union Health Benefits Trust Fund to be resolved by arbitration and repeals a prohibition against strikes by members of bargaining units on the issue of the amount of state and county contributions to the trust fund. And I believe that only applies to units that can strike already. And recommendation here is to pass as is. Questions or concerns? If not, Senator Chang.
Chair's recommendation for SB 183 is to pass unamended. Of the members present, are there any objections or reservations? Being none, the recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next up is SB 332. This prohibits sellers of foreclosed homes from bundling properties at public sale and requires each foreclosed home to be sold separately. Specifies that the sale of the foreclosed property is not final until either 15 days after the public sale or 45 days if an eligible bidder submits a subsequent bid or written notice of intent to submit a subsequent bid. Recommendation here is to pass unamended. Questions or concerns? If not, Senator Chang.
Chair's recommendation for SB 332 is to pass unamended. Of the members present, are there any objections or reservations? Seeing none, the recommendation is adopted.
Thank you, members. Next up is SB 340. This clarifies that the Hawaii Labor Relations Board has the authority to enforce its own orders issued pursuant to state law governing collective bargaining and public employment, in addition to discretion to seek judicial enforcement of its orders under the Hawaii Employment Relations Act. Recommendation here is to pass unamended. Questions or concerns? If not, Senator Chang.
Chair's recommendation for SB 340 is to be passed unamended. Of the members present, are there any objections or reservations? Seeing none, the recommendation is adopted.
Okay, thank you. Next up is SB 602. This includes creating the Hawaii Public Housing Authority, includes any parcels owned by the Hawaii Public Housing Authority as areas that may be closed to the public. Recommendation here is to pass as is. Questions or concerns? Seeing none, Senator Chang.
Chair's recommendation for SB 602 is to pass unamended. Of the members present, are there any objections or reservations? Seeing none, the recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next up is SB 869. This defines community outreach boards to mean a board established to serve in a community advisory capacity under a county commissioner, county department. Recommendation here. I'm sorry, and includes community outreach boards and existing provisions of the Sunshine Law related to neighborhood boards, so they'll be treated essentially like neighborhood boards. It does have a bad date already, so recommendation is to pass unamended. Questions or concerns? Seeing none, Senator Chang.
Chair's recommendation for SB 869 is to pass unamended. Of the members present, are there any objections or reservations? Seeing none, the recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next up is SB 871. This authorizes periods of imprisonment for individuals with previous arson convictions, authorizes additional penalties for arson crimes that endanger vulnerable areas. The recommendation here is to pass unamended. Questions or concerns? If not, Senator Chang.
Chair's recommendation for SB 871 is to pass unamended. Of the members present, are there any objections or reservations? Seeing none, the recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next up is SB 971. It provides that if a law enforcement officer lawfully stops a motor vehicle and the operator is cited for driving without a valid license, the officer shall not permit the operator to resume the use of the motor vehicle. Recommendation here is to pass with technical amendments only. Questions or concerns? If not, Senator Chang.
Chair's recommendation for SB 971 is to pass with amendments. Of the members present, are there any objections or reservations?
No.
Noting Senator Wa's objection, the recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next up is SB 1022. This prohibits intentionally leaving or confining pet animals in a vehicle under conditions that endanger their health, safety, or well-being. Allows law enforcement officers, animal control officers, and firefighters to enter an unattended vehicle to protect the animal, and allows private citizens to rescue a pet animal that has been left in an unattended vehicle under certain circumstances. Recommendation here is to make some amendments. We'll accept the AG's requested amendments, delete the first subsection of the proposed law in section 3 of this bill, stating that no one shall intentionally leave or confine a pet animal in an unattended vehicle until under dangerous conditions, because this activity falls under our current cruelty to animals in the 2nd degree and is not limited to pet animals. We'll combine the two proposed laws in the bill by incorporating the remaining parts of section 3 in the bill into section 2, and they'll be conforming and technical amendments as well. Questions or concerns? If not, Senator Chang.
Chair's recommendation for SB 1022 is to pass with amendments of the members present. Are there any objections or reservations?
No.
Noting objections from Chair Owa, the recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next up is SB 1099. This authorizes the Land Use Commission to designate important agricultural lands and adopt maps for the designated lands and counties that fail to identify and recommend important ag lands by December 31, 2027. Recommendations to go ahead and pass unamended. Questions or concerns? Seeing none, Senator Chang.
Chair's recommendation for SB 1099 is to pass unamended. Of members present, are there any objections or reservations? Seeing none, the recommendation is adopted.
Thank you very much. Next up is SB 1255. This amends the Uniform Information Practices Act to require each contract to perform a government function to expressly require the contractor to retain records in accordance with the retention schedule of the agency. Recommendation here is we're not quite finished with this one. I'd like to defer it. I will defer it until Wednesday, February 26th at 9:59 a.m. in this room 016. Next up is SB 1263, creates a process for expediting the review of residential transit-oriented development on certain parcels within county designated transit-oriented development zones that have a low risk of affecting historically significant resources. The recommendation on this one is to put a effective date, April 23, 2057, and that would be the only amendment. Questions or concerns? If not, Senator Chang.
Chair's recommendation for SB 1263 is to pass with amendments of the members present. Are there any objections or reservations? Seeing none, the recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next up is SB 1373. This authorizes Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs and certain licensing boards to automatically revoke and refuse to renew, restore, or reinstate the professional licenses of registered sex offenders. The recommendation here is to pass with amendments to clarify for each new section that the conviction is a predicate for registering as a sex offender, not for a conviction as a sex offender. So it's really a technical amendment, but it's a fairly extensive technical amendment. Questions or concerns? If not, Senator Chang.
Chair's recommendation for SB 1373 is to pass with amendments of the members present. Are there any objections or reservations? Seeing none, the recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next up is SB 1382. And this specifies that intentionally or knowingly causing bodily injury to a National Guard member in the performance of duty is a Class C felony. Recommendations to pass as is. Questions or concerns? If not, Senator Chang.
Chair's recommendation for SB 1382 is to pass unamended. Of the members present, are there any objections or reservations? Seeing none, the recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next up is SB 1408. This clarifies that Act 130 Session Laws of Hawaii 2024 shall take effect on either the date of the Secretary of the Interior's notification letter to the Congressional Committee chairpersons that the act meets none of the criteria in Title 43 CFR Code of Federal Regulations, Section 48.2, or on the date that the United States Congress approval becomes law. Recommendation is to pass as is. Questions or concerns? If not, Senator Chang.
Chair's recommendation for SB 1408 is to pass unamended. Of the members present, are there any objections or reservations? Seeing none, the recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next up is SB 1413. This allows the Hawaii Public Housing Authority to sell, donate, or dispose of property abandoned or seized in federal public housing projects. Requires HPHA to notify the known owner of the abandoned or seized property. And I believe they can already do this in state. They already have this authority in state public housing projects. So recommendations to pass as is. Questions or concerns? Seeing none, Senator Chang.
Chair's recommendation for SB 1413 is to pass unamended. Of the members present, are there any objections or reservations? Seeing none, the recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next up is SB 1429. This retroactively repeals the sunset date of the authorizations for primary caregivers to cultivate medical cannabis for their qualifying patients, increases the number of qualifying patients of primary caregivers authorized to care for from 1 to 5. And there's some other provisions as well. Recommendation here is pass with amendments and go with the Department of Health's amendments, let's see, which had to do with violations and penalties. So their SMA text So the violation would it? Can't remember what you said. So it adds a violations and penalties section in addition to any other penalties allowed by law. Any person who violates this part rule or rules adopted thereunder shall be fined no more than 5,000 for each separate violation. Each day in which a violation occurs or continues should be counted as a separate violation. I won't read the whole thing. The Department of Health may impose an administrative penalty. Any person aggrieved by the imposition of an administrative penalty, cease and desist order, or corrective action may request a contested case hearing. Any action taken to recover, collect, or enforce the penalty provided for in this section will be considered a civil action. And I think that's an adequate summary. Questions or concerns? If not, Senator Chang.
Chair's recommendation for SB 1429 is to pass with amendments. Of the members present, are there any objections or reservations? Seeing none, the recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next up is SB 1447 requires any order to cease and desist issued by the Director of Health that is administratively appealed to remain in effect during the appeals process. Recommendation is to pass as is. Questions or concerns? If not, Senator Chang.
Chair's recommendation for SB 1447 is to pass unamended. Of the members present, are there any objections or reservations? Seeing none, the recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next up is SB 1451. This enhances sharing of critical infrastructure information between infrastructure owners and operators in the state government. The recommendation on this one is to pass with amendments. We do have prior concurrence. SMA text, consider whether to revise, delete the phrase would reveal vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure and replace it with could reveal vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure. As noted in OIP's testimony, this phrase was added in the SD1, the would, and potentially reduces the amount of information that the program would withhold from public disclosure under this proposed confidentiality provision. So we think could is better because it we don't want to like provide a template for people who are trying to cause damage by saying here's all the things that could cause a problem. So I mean that could cause a problem. So we will include that in the stuff that is the information that is withheld as well. Questions or concerns? If not, Acting Vice Chair.
Chair's recommendation for SB 1451 is to pass with amendments. Of the members present, are there any objections or reservations? Seeing none, the recommendation is adopted.
Thank you very much. That concludes our agenda. Have a good weekend.